All right, since there's a lot that's been talked about so far in the handout you guys have looked at, is there any questions about diversion before I start? Anything before I start? Okay. So one thing Teresa talked about was having the one prosecutor that looks at diversion cases, and I kind of wanted to mention quickly that she looks at pre-charge diversion cases. So all of our prosecutors actually refer to post-charge diversion, and a lot of them, they have more time where they're negotiating with the defense attorney. They're learning a little more about the defendant's life. Then they can talk to me about it and see if they think the person's appropriate for post-charge diversion. So I just wanted to mention that the person that does pre-charge diversion is just really good at seeing the basic factors of, are they a first-time offender? Is there anything she sees it in the way where it's like, is there anything preventing them from getting a diversion? So the automatic assumption that a first-time offender should get pre-charge diversion, I guess, to kind of clarify that a little bit. So Nikki does the pre-charge diversion program. There are 123 active cases right now with 325 average annual referrals. So like for post-charge diversion, there's a lot more active, 360 with 275 average annual referrals. So there's a lot more volume coming into the pre-charge, but they're a lot smaller agreements. We kind of cater it to the person and what they need for the length. Or like sometimes it's the severity of the crime, the longer the agreement will be. If you wanted me to get into more of our philosophy on diversion and what we put into it, I can do that too.
Could you explain what you mean by a smaller agreement?
Like smaller, like fewer months. Fewer months. The rules don't change that much in the way that all of the agreements are catered towards the person and the individual, and the incident and the offense plays a role into it too. So we could have the same type of offense and same kind of personal characteristics, get the same length of an agreement on both pre-charge and post-charge, but typically pre-charge agreements are very short, like 6 months is our typical agreement, where post-charge is at least a year. So does that answer your question? Okay. We will go as low as 3 months. A lot of people who live out of county will do 3-month agreements for first-time offenders, have them do like an online course kind of thing. So if you have a possession of THC, you're driving through Wausau, because a lot of people drive through Wausau to go places. A lot of times, if they're a first-time offender, we'll be like, hey, you don't have to drive here from Chicago. How about we just do a pre-charge agreement where you do an online course, learn a little bit more about marijuana and what it does to your body, and then we'll close your case without charging it, kind of thing. And then we will have simple like possession of meth stuff as pre-charge agreements too. That's like the more severe end of, or like even more significant victim crimes. Like for example, if the victim doesn't want someone charged, but the prosecutor still believes that the case there is probable cause to charge, and they would charge it, but think that they would like to try pre-charge diversion first, based on the victim's wishes and everything like that. We will have more serious crimes in pre-charge diversion as well. Any other questions on that? So restitution. Go ahead.
It's your fault you brought it up.
No, that's fine.
To what degree does the victim have a say in whether or not somebody's eligible for one of these diversion things?
So if we get any agreement we get, it's kind of like it's the same philosophy as charging a case, right? So a victim is notified that the person is going to be offered a pre-charge agreement. They have a say in what the person's required to do. They have a say in whether or not they think whether or not they want it to happen. So for the most part, we will go forward with the pre-charge agreement if we think that's the most appropriate. But if there's like safety concerns, or the victim is just not okay with a pre-charge agreement, we could charge it and then do a post-charge agreement instead. A huge difference is the person's on bond in a post-charge agreement versus not a post-charge agreement. So a lot of times there's safety concerns and whatnot with victims. So that's plays a huge role in it. So, is that good? Okay. So for restitution collected, we've pre-charge agreements, we've collected $107,824 so far since the start of the program. At the end of 2007, we've mostly started in the beginning of 2008. And then the post-charge agreement, we've collected $707,280 for victims. For post-charge agreements, we have some really long agreements where people owe a lot of money, and it's their first offense. It's just they owe a lot, and a lot of people can't pay $80,000 back in a day. So as long as they're consistently paying money throughout the program, we'll keep them on the agreement for 10 years if we have to. So.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I often wonder about with diversion programs and the charging decisions when we're looking at addicts,
Mm-hmm.
The users, not the
Mm-hmm.
traffickers, because often drugs is a disease, and
Mm-hmm.
often many people repeat. How is that looked at differently, or in terms
Mm-hmm.
of how you're applying the system in terms of diversion and what's offered? Is it heightened when they're repeated to get them, to try to get them into more help? And then how is that applied when we're talking about charging decisions? Because I also think about
Sure.
enhancers,
Yeah.
but you might have just a person really sick.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. So something I'm super excited about is the detox unit opening up again. I've been waiting for this day because my dream is if you have simple possession of meth and heroin charges on the street, the officer can be like, do you want help? If the person wants help, you'd be like, okay, we can take you to the detox center. We'll notify the district attorney's office that you had possession of marijuana or meth or heroin on you or something like that. But if you stay in treatment and you make it through treatment, we won't charge you. You won't go through the process. Even if they're not a first-time offender, my dream is like if you're willing to get committed to get treatment and you're willing to stay in treatment, that process can work. So I've worked with the police departments and we kind of have a process figured out. We just need things to get built and staffed, which is soon. August is, right? No? Yeah? I don't know. What? With the detox unit. It starts getting built in August, so it will be built someday, and my dream will come true. It's fine. A huge thing with possession of meth and heroin is that they're felony charges. Okay, so if we do a post-charge agreement on meth and heroin, you're telling someone, I want you to plead to a felony, and then you make it through treatment, and then we'll dismiss your case, right? Well, you're telling someone to plead to a felony, and you just need to be very confident that they will make it through the programming. So I don't feel ethically okay like being like, well, this person's not stable, they're not ready to get treatment, but I want them to plead to a felony. And then when the alternative could have been amend to a misdemeanor and then have them go on probation. So there's just a bunch of different factors that come into it. We do try to do pre-charge diversions, but a lot of times they need a lot more case management than we can provide. So there's a lot of different factors.
Where does that case management need to occur?
Okay, so in-county residents can go to Attic Correctional Services for case management. But the case management has limitations, like, I don't know if you guys know about CCS at North Central Healthcare, where it can be more intensive and it can, they can even drive people places and stuff like that, where Attic has a lot of limitations and it's just case management. They can refer to places, but it's kind of has to be motivated by the defendant to get their treatment and to complete their conditions. The Attic case manager just monitors to make sure they're complying with the conditions and then can refer them to additional resources as needed throughout the agreement. Does that answer your question? So most of the people, well, in-county residents go through Attic Correctional Services for the most part, not always. Sometimes if someone's already in treatment and they're really motivated and their attorney is like, can they just do it on their own? They're doing a great job. Or like, sure, you can do it on your own since you're already really motivated to complete treatment on your own. But for out-of-county residents, that gets a lot trickier. Like a third of our criminal justice population is in out-of-county residents. Only 2/3 of the people are in county. So when a prosecutor's looking at a case, they, have to think about taxpayer resources, right? So taxpayers don't want to pay for someone who lives in Milwaukee to get treatment, right? But at the same time, you don't want to bog down the system with having someone from Milwaukee come here and go through the system and then have that kind of cost to the taxpayers. So it's a really weird balance that you have to figure out on what you can do. You don't want people that live out of county to get better charging sentencings because they live out of county, and we don't want to spend time on them. And so there's a lot of different things that go into that. So a lot of times for out of county people, if we can do online programming or some kind of natural consequence that doesn't involve intensive programming, we will do that for out of county people, and those are case managed by me and Nikki. If someone's already in residential treatment outside of the county and they already have a huge support system, we will consider other cases as well. Does that answer that question?
Sorry, I have another question.
No
So, also when I'm thinking about drug offenses, comes to mind too is sort of, maybe not the super addictive, but the marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we're thinking about marijuana, not necessarily addictive, but probably recidivism rate
Mm-hmm.
on that. Is it such that, because I know I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the second time could be a felony.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a low-level sort of user, is there any appetite for decriminalizing or lowering it to an ordinance, those particular ones that are not the trafficker or
Mm-hmm.
not the juvenile shooting kind of thing?
So police ordinances for possession of THC have gone way up. I don't know. I don't have access to the municipal numbers at all. The Sheriff's Department has had an ordinance for possession of THC for a while, and they've been using it more frequently. You do have to think, too, sometimes a diversion option is better than an ordinance, because a diversion option keeps it off your record altogether, and it's cheaper than a ticket. But they do tickets here. Second time offenses, if it's simple possession, if Teresa corrects me if I'm wrong, but that's typically not charged as second and subsequent for THC. So we do not charge felonies for simple possession. Now, if you're trafficking heroin and you have THC on you as well, they'll charge you with second and subsequent. But that's not usually their main charge. But it's only if they have a lot more severe charges with it. So we do have people charged with that, but that's not their sole charge. Does that make sense? So we do diversion options. We do a lot of pre-charge diversions with THC. We do treat where, if it were legal here in Marathon County, it still probably wouldn't be legal for people 21 and younger. So I do treat 22 and older and 21 and younger a little different, where I don't typically do drug testing for older people. People above 22, where with younger people, we will do drug testing. I've seen a lot of really, really good progress with adolescents who do drug testing and get sober, because a lot of times the ideology is well, it's just, life is so boring without marijuana. What would I do? This is my recreation, this is my life. And then they stay sober after the 3-month point, when it's totally out of their system and they start seeing life again. They realize their whole demeanor changes, and their outlook towards life and whatnot. So I still believe in drug testing and whatnot for younger individuals, but for other places where they would legally be able to use, we just mainly do education. Sometimes people just need to be aware that it is an illegal substance and whatnot. So,
and I guess one last follow-up with that, and I guess this might be more for the DA in terms of just your thoughts overall in terms of future. Would in terms of marijuana. You know, as you mentioned, for someone 21 or older, a smaller amount, the DA office be interested in saying that, you know, okay, for these low-level amounts, we're not interested in charging those, and thus those are not cases. Then obviously, if they're not charging those, that then the police department then pursues.
Sure, and we do, I mean, we kind of do that focus already with first-time offenders with diversion. Like, we want people to not get into the system. We don't want marijuana to be the reason for someone to become a criminal. And diversion it's a good opportunity for someone to check themselves over a ticket. I still believe in kind of a pre-charge diversion just to realize, oh my gosh, this is a crime. I really have penalties, like, versus a ticket for $250 altogether with the fine and court costs or whatever. I still have, what? Oh, I thought you said.
But I think we're talking about two different things on this end, and that I'm saying not being pursued as a charge at all.
I think,
versus,
Will,
we
if we can get
Sure.
back to the issue of diversion, I think you're asking prospectively what their position might be if an ordinance was introduced for decriminalization. And as much as that may be a relevant discussion for public policy, I'm not sure that she's in a position to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, the police department does issue ordinances all the time for possession of THC. So.
And I apologize. Just it's just because the presentations that run kind of fast. I wanted to kind of ask the question earlier, but did not have an opportunity. But I'll move on.
So Ruth, your infographics here are great.
Thanks.
So when you have the better substance abuse treatment resources, I'm going to assume your success rates are going to go up even higher. I mean, they're already beating national averages, so I'm assuming that's probably a majority of those recidivisms.
Well, it's going to be a little different in the way that we'll have higher risk people in the program too.
Okay.
So it'll probably be considered as a separate program in the way like OARs aren't first-time offenders. Anybody with an OAR has the opportunity to go through diversion if they're a first-time offender or not. With the possession, simple possession, if we do that kind of program, those won't all be first-time offenders either. So that's going to be kind of a separate can of worms. But yeah, if the treatment does go up in general and if there's better wraparound services, I believe the numbers will get better. Yeah.
So higher acceptance rates, better success rates, lower jail population. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to ask a question, because you put the information on here relative to race, and that's obviously part of the conversation that we're having. Everything kind of is in line in both pre and post charge diversion statistics relative to community makeup, except for in the Black community, in both. There's a 6% variance on pre-charge and a 4% variance in post-charge. People can look at the data and just make inferences about that. What is your experience that might lead you to explain that within the office? And then I have maybe a suggestion to look at this.
For the reason why there's a higher percentage of Black individuals in diversion than in the population of Marathon County, I think could be explained because the criminal justice system as a whole has a higher population of Black individuals. And the out-of-county thing, where a huge portion of people are from out-of-county, so.
Sure. Yeah, as I'm looking at this, I'm just wondering to myself, and I haven't ever looked at this or looked at the data for sure, but I wonder in Marathon County specifically if there's, again, this is assumption and I shouldn't make those, but I'm assuming that more people in a younger age demographic are in the criminal justice system than older. And is that true?
Yeah, I mean, the risk to reoffend, the younger you are, the more likely you are to come back into the system.
But just as a whole,
right,
younger people commit more crimes?
Which, I mean, you can assume from that the younger you are, the more crimes you commit. That means there's more younger people in the system, kind of thing, yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to, for you, so I was running some numbers in my head, and as the stats geek here, I think we need to be very careful. We're all, looking at your active cases and assuming that the data stuff, you're all within a margin of error. So I think we need to be very cautious when we're looking at 360 active cases. That sample size compared to when we're comparing to the population, that you're at a really weird bias.
Mhm.
So I think everything, the differences all can easily can be a margin of error and stuff, so.
The race is from the population as a whole, not just the active, so
Right, but
it'd
then
be
if you
like.
look at your active
Yeah.
cases, you've
Yeah.
got a disparity there
Yep.
of, so that was my.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say something about, for example, post-charge diversion. There often, I would say more often than not, is a negotiation with an attorney and the district attorney's office, for example. And every attorney who who practices in Marathon County should understand that there is a post-charge diversion. So whether this is information, at least for post-charge I'm talking about right now, of individuals who have come to an agreement to be into the post-charge diversion program, meaning it's not the people who were necessarily considered or referred, or the prosecutor might have thought that they were appropriate, but that the defense attorney, the defendant, and the prosecutor all came to an agreement. So it's a little different dynamic for post-charge than it is pre-charge. There are intervening factors that might come into play depending on who the defense attorney is, whether they believe in post-charge, whether the defendant.
And can that be, is that part of a plea process?
Yes.
And then, I was gonna ask earlier, and then we move forward, what's the percentage of plea bargaining we're doing in Marathon County?
We probably will be able to talk about that with the university study. We talk about that one, the university study, did they talk about that? What results in trial versus plea?
Oh, yeah.
I think the university project, what I'm saying is, we just got the
Sure.
preliminary information. I think we will be able to give information
Okay.
on exact stats on that as a result of that project, so, good question.
And then in terms of OWIs, those for diversion programs, I think we had when we had another presentation, it was mentioned that a lot of sort of the programs and stuff are kind of set by the state, which makes it unaffordable for some low-income people. I don't know, but wanted to take this opportunity to ask, is there anything or any solutions that maybe we could do to lessen the burden for
Cost.
those people facing those?
Yeah, so like we can't divert OWIs. That's just not something we can do by statute. But operating after revocation, so like you get an OWI, let's say it's like around $3,000 cost overall, right? And a lot of people can't afford $3,000. But then you get an OAR and another OAR and another OAR because you couldn't afford to pay the $3,000 in the first place. So that's why we have the pre-charge diversion program, to be like, hey, we have people with 6 OAR cases that are sitting there being like, they're getting, working towards getting their license. They did their assessment. They just need to complete their programming or pay a couple more fees, and things like that. So we try what we can on our end to do it. I mean, there could be, I don't really know for sure exactly how the municipal courts work with fee payback. I know they've started some new things, but the process, from what I hear defendants say, is not like a super intuitive, simple process for someone. Like there's a lot of municipalities other than Wausau who are like, you need to pay your fines in full. We do not take partial payments. I think Wausau, if anybody knows this, let me know if it's different. But you have to file a form to go in front of the judge to get approved to do a payment plan. And then you have to stick with the payment plan. And if you don't stick with the payment plan gets taken away and then you have to pay in full. And some people owe thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So municipally, I can't do anything. But we try with OARs, so do what we can. And we'll keep cases open a really long time if people are trying, so. Yeah. Anything else?
No.
I think we kind of went through everything else. I mean, a recidivism rate, we try to get it below 15%. And the national average overall for recidivism is 33%. So, yeah. I think that's all I have for presentation stuff. Unless you have more questions, I'm willing to answer anything. Yeah, you're welcome.
So, Ruth,
Yeah.
so you've got in the pre-charge diversion program, you've got
Yeah.
data through 2013. Do you have anything more recent?
For the pre-charge, this is a very time-consuming thing to do data. So this kind of data is not automatic. Another wish I have in the world is to have databases. You know, there are databases out there where that all you have to do is click a button and it'll show you all these answers. Where in our system, you pull an Excel sheet and then there's holes. And where recidivism's not measured anywhere in any programming, so we have interns that do that. And so they go case by case by case by case and check if they have had a new criminal charge. And so we've made it through the post-charge diversion, and now we're making it through the pre-charge, and we just haven't gotten there yet. It'll be updated hopefully by the end of the summer, or hopefully the intern won't leave before it's done.
But again, I think getting back to Michael's point,
Mhm.
that's good information to have. And,
Mhm.
you know, if there are investments that need to be made and we need to strengthen programs like the detox and other programs as part of that, those are the investments that we need to make, and that's driven by
Yeah.
those numbers. So if there's anything we can do to help or highlight the need for that, or
Sure.
maybe that ought to be one of our
I think
recommendations.
it's been really, really common for people to ask for more and more data. And like Teresa said, we're not data analysts,
Yeah.
and we don't hire data analysts. And, you know, most data analysts work for companies that have a button that you can press to analyze the data for you. So it's like, we don't work in a private company, we work for the government. And databases that have the capability to have a nice dashboard, I don't know if they're very affordable for people like us, but it would be really, I mean, the time consumingness of having to compile data is very time consuming. So if people want more data, and that's going to be something to pursue in the future, databases that collect data in the way that people want to see it would probably be a good investment and thing to work towards. So I would love programs that measure data better, for sure. I created my own dashboard through Excel because it's not possible otherwise.
I would just jump in really quickly and say that I think these recidivism rates are one of the most impressive things I've seen all night.
Well, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We try. I mean, keeping people out of the criminal justice system is important, right? And there's a lot of people who mess up and then don't ever mess up again. And if you can avoid that one mess up not being on someone's record, it makes my day happy. So, yeah. Anything else?
And I want to stress that this is something that Marathon County has chosen to pursue, is a diversion program, and chosen to expand and try to look at new alternatives. This isn't something that we're mandated as a district attorney's office to do or as a county to do, or certainly not in the way that we're doing it. When Ruth talked about the detox center, and I am fully supportive of that. We had groups meeting, were very energized and trying to look at solutions, law enforcement bringing forth individuals who are clearly addicted but are not, don't have the criminogenic needs that other dealers may have, or who are committing other crimes, and they don't have a place that they can go to for a resource pre-charge to reduce the risk by getting the person into a treatment for the meth and heroin individuals. So I wanted to get back to something you said about, or actually Ruth said about ordinances versus diversion, and just so people understand that if somebody, for example, gets a county ordinance that shows up on CCAP, Wisconsin Circuit Court Access, for all to see, if we can, in a THC case, rather than getting an ordinance that shows up there, if we can divert that individual, it actually might be a better outcome for that person to have nothing visible. The other thing that I think is missing in the system, and I don't know if this is, I don't know actually what law enforcement has access to, or if it varies by department, but information sharing about contacts an individual has had for certain offenses. So if we start talking about using citations or ordinances for certain types of offenses, if one municipality issues that individual an ordinance or citation, and the next day they're in a different municipality just down the road, and they're given an ordinance or citation for the same exact thing, and this entity doesn't know what this entity has done, and then we get a referral in our office, and we don't know that the person has received a dozen ordinances for the same thing. Let's say it's retail theft. We would like some kind of a system where there's information sharing, where we can assess, is there a need, and it doesn't necessarily mean the person has to be charged, but for everyone's sake, law enforcement resources, victims, business owners in the community, or other victims in the community, their productivity as a citizen, all those things, we could intervene with diversion if we knew that there was this going on, and law enforcement might choose, instead of an ordinance at that point, to get it to our office so we can do individualized programming to maybe try to get at the heart of what the issue is, so we don't keep expending resources. So there's a lot of things to consider, and that is information sharing, having a unified county-wide system of information sharing amongst law enforcement to the DA's office, having a usable data input and output system for statistics would be great. Those are really high dollar requests and asks, and so
where are we on a county-wide system? You know, it's beyond the scope of
you know that?
this, but is Everest Metro using Superion? So is everybody, or Athens, Edgar?
Athens.
Yeah, maybe you can talk about it.
Athens and Marathon only use the CAD system, the computer-aided dispatch. Athens and Marathon only use our computer-aided dispatch and uses the MDCs in the squad cars. Every other agency, I guess you can say, is using all of that, as well as RMS, which is the records management. JMS is used by the county, the jail system.
So how
Yeah,
far off?
I think effectively, to answer that question directly, yes, we are in a countywide system.
Yes.
Almost every contact that is had by a law enforcement officer in Marathon County, we can access and we can see throughout the county by different agencies. You just can't see it, that's right. Why would you need to see it?
Yeah, and if you stop, well, you can only speak for your agency. So if you stop an individual with THC, are you checking to see if they had a citation in a different jurisdiction?
Yeah.
Are you checking to see if there is a citation in a different jurisdiction that might have been issued recently, or?
Yeah, I mean, typically when we're gonna do that, if we're gonna issue a citation or make a criminal arrest, we'll look to see in our system what contacts we've had, whether citations have been issued by other local agencies. But again, it's just a Marathon County system, so they could go to Stevens Point, and we're not gonna know that they got issued a citation there, or Wapaka, or Merrill, or, so we're not gonna know those citations, but.
And
Yeah, and I guess,
we don't know that at all, so.
and I guess it's my fault, because the heart of sort of my concern about this is because it would work great, obviously, to diversion, not have it at all, but at what point, when they come back, you catch them again? Because I guess what I am more concerned about is the eventual felony, because that's what's hard when I have clients come, to us, and they're trying to get other things reestablished in terms of their life. That's what's hard to beat. And I think take the citation when you're looking at that versus a felony. Although, so I guess at what point do the diversion programs no longer sort of offer? You have a person that's been caught with marijuana a few times, low level, because that's what I'm worried about, sort of that felony hanging out there, which it then is sort of, in terms of your life moving forward, it's really crippling.
And I think that goes back to what I think Ruth said, which is that I would say the norm is that we're not issuing felonies for second and subsequent THC possessions unless there is an accompanying higher level delivery or some other offense, likely another felony, where that felony isn't going to be the determining factor. It's going to be the other felony, actually. So I could say I don't think that's always been the case in our office, but I think there has been a change in philosophy on second and subsequent THC, which has been in place for several years, where it isn't charged solely if that's the only charge for a simple possession. I don't think that's generally happening. So it's going to be looked at, was the person offered an opportunity for an ordinance? Was the person given diversion? Then the question becomes whether we charge the THC or we look for different options. It's really not being considered for second and subsequent. But I certainly can talk to Kyle and have him reach out to you and talk a little bit more in depth about that, because I think he is really in the know about what's happening with those cases, and I'm sure be happy to talk to you about that. Oh, it's only 9:16. Nice. I just want to get back to, I guess, a little bit about considerations for conditions of release. It gets back to the original question. This is all set forth in the statute. So just understanding that the first line of the statute talks about considerations for bond, and that it is put in place for purposes of ensuring that a person appears in court. But if you go on to read the statute, it says consideration for determining the amount of bail to fix is listed here for you. So there are many considerations that we have that we try to get as much information as possible to present to the court. And obviously defense counsel presents what they believe to be proper considerations for the court. And then once bond is set, whatever that may be, if defense counsel or the defendant continues to object to that amount or something changes, they can bring a motion to modify bond. One of the things that we've been trying, and I can't say we're doing it in all cases, but we're trying, is when a defendant brings a motion to modify bond, we are now trying to file a written response versus just arguing in court what the state's position is. Because what happens is in CCAP, if you've ever looked at Wisconsin Circuit Court Access, Marathon County actually does a wonderful job of inputting information, but it doesn't tell you at all what the state's position was, what was argued in court. All it tells you is what the decision was. So a lot of times I see in comments in social media posts or whatever, like, how could the state do that or whatever, and actually we put forth all these arguments and we don't make the decision, the court makes the decision. So we want to be really transparent with the public, and if the media wants to look into it, or if the public wants to look and see what the DA's office put forth to the court, again, we talk about that accountability. Here it is. Here's what the court was provided by way of information before that decision was made. So I think that's really important. One of the other things that I'm not the ultimate decision maker on this. I'm just putting forth ideas. You talked about problem solving. When individuals are putting forth their reasons for a level of bond or a type of bond, whether it be signature or cash, if they're going to represent something to the court, my request is that it be under oath. I think there needs to be an accountability for what offenders tell judges in the court of law, and then if they are, in fact, not being truthful, there can be some kind of response or consequence, and I think that should just be the norm. People are responsible for what they tell the court. So I've actually put that forth as a proposal, and I'm not the final decision maker about whether that will occur, but we keep looking at things like that, that maybe can make, if it can make a difference and maybe deter misinformation from getting before the court, I think that's really important. So these are some of the things that we look at some things I just wanted to, I guess, throw out there. Some are not, maybe not even directly related to the slide. When we talk about operating after revocation offenses, for example, when you look at Marathon County, I want you guys to be cognizant of the fact that Marathon County, you probably already are, is a large county. We have not very good access to public transportation, especially in some of the western parts of the county. So when we look at our operating after revocation offenses versus a metropolitan area, people have alternatives for transportation in those areas. So I think that's important when you look at why is Marathon County maybe different as far as numbers? What's the explanation? And then how can we resolve that problem at its source so that we can really address it versus just putting a Band-Aid on it. So with regard to bail considerations, one of the things that I've been talking about with our staff, and I don't know the solution yet, and I want to talk with the chief more about this, is if you're going to evaluate who's getting what bonds, like what is there a disparity, and what's the basis for that disparity? One of the things that we look at is ties to the community, connections to this community. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think law enforcement experiences individuals saying that they have an address and a local address, and they may in fact have only been in this area for a day or 2 days. They don't actually reside at that address. And that's what's given to law enforcement, and that just kind of is what follows that person through the system. So is that person actually a resident of this county? Is this person, and I think that's important, because then the other individual who is honest and says, no, I live in Missouri, that person then doesn't have ties to the community and may get a cash bond because they don't have ties to the community, are less likely to show up for court. So I don't know what can be done to establish if someone is actually a resident of this county, or if the address is actually their address. But, you know, it's one of those data points where I don't know that we're getting accurate data. And it would be something very interesting to look at, and something that I think we should have an answer to if we start looking at who's getting what bond.
Do you find that you have good, I mean, we've talked about the relationship between also the Wausau police chief, but do you feel that you have, without obviously naming, good cooperation within the other police departments within the county, and in terms of, you know, how that information exchange, let's say from one police department to the Wausau Police Department and to the county?
I do, and you know, we're going to talk about the university project, and one of the things that when we had the presentation yesterday of the preliminary results was, it's obvious that the DA's office has good relationships with all the entities, law enforcement entities in the county, because we're able to get things referred and charged in a quick manner. So if we need additional information, a lot of times there are multi-jurisdiction responses. We're able to get the information in a timely fashion so we can do our jobs. So there definitely is good cooperation. I think a lot of the barriers that we see are money-driven. Each municipality, each agency has limits as to what they can and can't invest in. So if we run into barriers with media, body cams, different types of media that they're using, for the DA's office to say, you need to change that, you need to invest in this, they just don't have the funds. So it's not really a barrier, but it creates a barrier. This is the use of cash bail in Marathon County. 51% of, this is now people in custody. So when law enforcement has made a decision to arrest, when the court gets that person before them, this is 51% of those people get signature bonds after law enforcement has decided to arrest and that individual comes in custody before the court, 51% of those individuals are being released on signature bonds. And then 34% are getting released on cash and 15% are, so that's not of the percentage of all referrals, it's percentage of those people coming in custody in front of the court, which is a small percentage. That makes sense?
Yeah, they're
You want-
arrested and didn't follow.
Right, they're arrested and remain in custody at that original booking end. They are arrested, remain in custody, and are brought before the court in custody. So that's a very small percentage of people. And of those people, 51% are still being released. So I guess it's just important to understand that we're not detaining a significant portion of our population in the jail when you look at it relative to how many people are referred for crimes. We looked at the drug trends already. The university project, we will hopefully have, or somebody will be sharing these results with you. Many of the, I don't know if you want to be talking about this more, but I just want to say that we proposed, the DA's office supported and proposed many of these studies because we want to know. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more
Yeah,
about, so she's sort of
I
our
don't know.
coordinator.
I don't know how many people have heard about university and what Marathon County you guys are all. So the Marathon County and there's the university program is put on by UW, connecting students to do work for the government. Okay, so Marathon County has a contract to do a bunch of these projects, and there's a lot of projects that we're doing with different university students across the UW system. So the DA's office proposed 4 different projects, and all 4 of them were accepted. This is one of the projects that was actually not the one that I proposed, but I'm not leading. The prosecutor, Davis Rundy, is leading this one on a diversity study in the Marathon County criminal justice system, so disparity within the system. And these are the different things that they're going to be looking at. The other projects I proposed were on the proxy system, which that one's completed, where we talked with professors about using the proxy versus other options. And there was another one in databases that we're working with CCIT, so hopefully, so there is one data system, I guess I'll be very short with this, for case management that just does not work very well. And before looking into get a different database, I wanted to see what databases are there, what can they do, what are their capabilities, what are we using, what could we use, is there a current database out there that we could use for case management? So the student's going to map out what we have and what the capabilities are, and if there's any possibilities to be able to do different things with them than what we are doing. And then the other one, which we just had the presentation on yesterday, was on case processing through the system. So he did a bunch of statistics on how case processing is working, and has a bunch of different things on that. So his whole research packet, I guess, is going through approval right now, and we can distribute it once it's done. So that's that. And then Supervisor Harris, there's your actionable items.
Yeah. So we're not, this is just ideas that we had, that we thought we'd put forth. I'm not sure how they align with what this task force is trying to do, but we thought we'd put them forward. Forfeiture diversion, we talked a lot about that already, and the pros and cons. That's why there's an asterisk by it. So there are pros and cons to that versus using our diversion program. Fee payoff programs, we just talked about that with regard to operating while intoxicated offenses and making sure that we're not setting up individuals for future criminal activity because they can't pay off a fine on the previous criminal activity. So anything that we can do to make those payment plans more accessible, flexible, transparent, whatever, would be wonderful. driving offenses, with regard to undocumented residents, I think that, I'm not sure what the solution is to that, but certainly there needs to be some kind of conversation at the state level. I know it's happening. I think, I'm not sure how far it's going to get, but any involvement you want in our office and what we're seeing, and what kind of numbers we're seeing, as best we can, although that's not, we don't necessarily keep track of undocumented residents' numbers, but certainly that is a problem, and I don't pretend to offer any solution for that other than the conversation remaining in the forefront and with proper facts. Support wraparound services, alcohol and drug treatment, already talked about that, sober housing, encourage collaborative efforts. One of the other wonderful things that I commend the chief for is the Homelessness Initiative. And we, as an office, are very supportive of working with the Wausau Police Department on that initiative. I think it's very important that we not only see what law enforcement is seeing, but also understanding the complexity of the issue. So we actually took our office, our attorneys, all of our, I think we almost had all of our assistant DAs there, and our staff, our victim witness staff, and law enforcement. Matt Barnes took us out in the community to the homeless areas, where homeless people are staying, and to see the living conditions, to see, to talk with him about what law enforcement is doing, efforts that they have to support. And we also had some opportunity to engage with some of the individuals at the gazebo. Our staff, we stopped there and talked with them, and it was a wonderful experience for our staff, and I'm really appreciative of the police department for working with us. And we have a designated prosecutor who is a liaison with that program. It's somewhat difficult to have her handle every case that involves that initiative, but certainly is the contact and go-to person, and we're very supportive of collaborating with the police department. And I know one of our ADAs and one Officer Lemoran had a very creative collaboration for an individual. I think that was very successful, and it really was thinking outside the box. And I'm definitely supportive of our assistants doing whatever we can with law enforcement, because I know they have public safety at the forefront of their mind as well. So that's been great. And then school alcohol and drug education, I think, is very important as well. So.
Sorry, quick last question there, and I'm gonna date myself a little bit. When I grew up, we had the DARE program. So
no more.
Is there anything similar to that?
Well, that I guess was our. I don't know, and I can't answer that, but it's something that it seems like maybe with the drug trends that we're seeing, I don't know what the impact would be, but it's something to maybe worth a discussion.
I will say academically that the DARE program actually encourages drug use and does not reduce it, but you do get a free T-shirt.
It worked for me.
I think, too, the DARE program, I mean, it wasn't replaced, but we do have school liaison officers, and that's probably more likely to be the encounter in those more meaningful conversations.
Yeah, it's something, we do a program at the DA's office where we work with law enforcement, actually the Wausau Police Department, probation and parole, treatment providers, and it's, we go into all of the freshmen and or sophomore classes in the Wausau School District, and we talk about sexual assault and the definition of consent, potential penalties, what can happen as far as a victim coming forward and reporting, what the process would be, the support that they would receive. The treatment provider talks about supporting individuals who come forward in sexual assault, and we do a panel. I can't remember if it's once or twice a year. We've been doing it for several years. And it is extremely effective in reaching the students. And I would love to see more initiatives like that. I know nobody has time, but we do make time for it, and I think that there's been a lot of great feedback for that, so I'd like to continue to do that and maybe expand that into other areas.
Can you explain how mental illness affects your workload? In where you see gaps or needs above?
You know I'm going to invite you up here. You know, it is just a horrible situation for a prosecutor to be in. We were just dealing with one the other day, a situation where it's clearly a mental illness. It has public safety dynamics, maybe even victim dynamics of battery or criminal damage to property in the situation, but doesn't rise to the level of an intervention through any other service or option that can provide for continued public safety, and we end up being the entity that deals with the court system. And none of the solutions that we offer, alternatives that we offer, are, I think, the best. And I don't know if you want to talk more. Go ahead.
Someone that would be great to talk to about that is Rhonda, who works in the jail. She sees a lot of that, the ones that get turned away from the healthcare center and whatnot. She deals with a lot of that stuff. But when someone comes into the system with charges that has significant mental health issues, Rhonda and I work together on alternatives that we can get them somewhere safe out of the system without getting them into the system. So we do a lot of that, and try to see if we can get them out of the jail quickly but safely back into the community. So I don't know if there's something else.
I definitely think that is a continuing conversation, and the criminal justice system for certain individuals is not the place to deal with their mental health issues, for sure.
I guess there are sometimes mental health rises to the point where a prosecutor can't prosecute the case. So that's something that's really tricky, because for diversion, we have a philosophy: if you can't prosecute, we don't divert, because we wouldn't charge it if they failed. So those cases are not prosecuted in general. So that's why I work with Rhonda as much as I can to try to get those people services without them getting into the system. But if it's to the point where it could still be charged, we do diversion options a lot of times, helping people get med stabilization and everything like that before they get charged. So.
Other questions?
I do have a couple questions.
Okay.
And I realize we've used a lot of your time, and if we stay here much longer, you're going to walk instead of home
This is when
to
I
the
get my
courthouse.
second. This is when I get my
Yeah.
second wind.
Starting next
So
day.
it's all good.
So these are just bigger questions. I don't know how you guys manage the tension between like the right to a speedy trial versus due process, or, like thoroughness. Like, I don't know how, like in your process that happens, like with a case, because it's, you've got all of this work to prep a case or to get through, and like to give people, the time to go through that. But then, there's some people that are staying there for a long time. So can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, what would be different or what's your biggest challenge there?
Yes, I would like to talk about that. So I know that maybe you saw Channel 7 the other night. We talked a little bit about accountability in the system, and there needs to be accountability at all stages of the system. Mm-hmm. For example, one of the things we talked about, I don't know if this is answering your question, but one of the things we talked about is attorney withdrawal. So making sure that is the response that is needed in a case. So let's say a case has been charged and pending for months, and then there's a motion to withdraw as an attorney or fire the attorney. If a new attorney comes on board, they have to get fully up to speed on that case and start all over again. Yep.
Can I just interrupt? Mike, before you leave, can we just set a date for the next?
Sorry, I need to fly to LA tomorrow.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, LA, we feel bad. Oh.
I fly back on Saturday.
Oh,
Not like-
now I actually do feel bad.
I just want to go there.
I was
get
just
the Delta
jealous.
variant,
I was just jealous.
Or, make my way back.
So a 3-week time frame would put us into the week of the,
August 9th is available, it's a Monday night.
how would that work for folks?
I will not be here that week.
Okay. How are we the following week?
Following week, there was a HR meeting, or, I'm sorry, public health and safety until 7 o'clock.
How are we on the 17th?
Available.
Although I guess I don't have that as a start. 18th, I said we wouldn't do any more Wednesdays, but
Available.
would the 18th work for people? Let's try that and let's check with Sarah and Haley and make sure they can make it. So let's plan on the 18th. Sorry.
Thank you.
And just to go back to my question, the reason I ask is because in the 21st task force report for policing that Obama did, there's this idea of procedural justice, and a lot of that was procedural justice on the front side before somebody's arrested or charged. I'm just kind of curious how maybe that overlaps into, your world, which is, this question I ask.
Well, right, I hope this is answering your question. So there is, my goal is to eliminate unnecessary delay within the criminal justice system, and I think part of it is, we talked about making sure that we have all of the information that we can provide as discovery to defense counsel, and that there isn't stuff we're missing, because delay can result if we haven't turned over a particular item. And remember, we talked about the backlog, and we had 400 more cases pending at the end of last year than we did the year before. And the more cases, the more likely mistakes are going to be made or things are going to be missed. So that's one thing that has to be at the forefront. But also delays, like I was talking about attorney withdrawals, and just making sure that we're very mindful of have the legal requirements been made for that attorney to be fired or to withdraw, because we had a situation just within the last couple weeks where an attorney was fired or withdrew at 4:35 the night before a trial was supposed to start. It's a multiple day trial with a victim, and law enforcement spends a tremendous amount of time preparing with our office to get those cases ready for trial. I'd be estimating, but maybe 40, 50 hours on our prosecutor's part, and a lot of times in the bigger cases, we'll have law enforcement with us to interview witnesses, because we can't become a witness. When we're preparing witnesses, they oftentimes say additional information, or we have to be able to document that. We can't become a witness, so a law enforcement officer is with us. Then it gets delayed for, another year? And we're not going to remember any of the stuff that we prepared. We'll have to prepare all over again. So ensuring that every stage of that process is done with best practice, and that we have parameters in place, making sure that if there are deadlines in a case, they are met, whether it's by our office or defense attorneys. There should be accountability if a deadline is not met, to file motions or any kind of legal challenges, and that's a problem. So it's something that we've been discussing. It is, I keep bringing it up because I think it's important, but ultimately I can't, those are all judicial things. I can't do that.
Just one more quick question, maybe. If you could wish or have officers have or do something different on the street before something is arrested, or there's arrest, or a charge is brought, what would that be?
Man, you guys do a lot of really good stuff. I think in a perfect world, a thorough criminal history would be done and evaluated. It's not realistic. I think that's something that, like you talked about the disparity between referrals and what we charge. I think that's part of the reason for the disparity. I see how much time it takes our office to do that, and I just don't think that that's realistic for an officer on the street. We've talked about that's what I do admire about the Wausau Police Department, is that anytime we come up with an idea that could make things more efficient or effective, we just bring it to them. And if it's possible, we get it done. So one of the things we talked about just today was identifying individuals who don't speak English and having it be more transparent in the report that they don't speak English, what language do they speak, and therefore when someone is but they're going to come to court, that we have the interpreter ready, that everybody's aware. We can give notice to whoever needs notice. Our victim witness staff, if we're going to contact a victim and it's likely that the victim may speak in a different language, we can be prepared for that. I mean, just notification of those things that the officer might observe that might help us down the road if we know that as soon as possible. So, domestic violence cases, there's a lot of data that's kept on that. We just talked about that. Maybe identifying the role and relationship of the domestic violence perpetrator and victim so that we can easily access that when we're charging would save, if it saves 5 minutes on 5 cases a day, every day, that adds up. But they're always receptive to it. We not be able to do exactly what I would dream we could do, but we find a solution that is better than what we had before. So they really do a wonderful job. We don't always agree, and that's great. And we do hold each other accountable. We'll get calls about our prosecutors, and you'll say, what's going on here? Why was this case resolved like this? Why was this bond set like this? What's going on here? We'll get those calls, and we'll also call over there and say, this report is insufficient. We need this information, and it's never met with egos or arrogance. They're doing a wonderful job.
Other questions?
Just a comment. I just want to thank you all for coming tonight. A wealth of information, and thank you for the work that you all do. Appreciate it.
I want to do ditto to that, and I'll pass on to Kyle our appreciation to all of you, because I know it took a lot of time. So we may, as we get into our recommendation stage, call on you again for
Absolutely.
specific input.
We're going to start that meeting earlier though, right?
Yes. And we might put Ben in a soundproof room so you don't have to be so nice to him. So
Yeah, I know. I really appreciate your time. This is my job, and you're doing this because you want to make a difference and you want as much information as possible so the right decisions are made. So I should be thanking you all for taking the time to do this, and I do really appreciate it. If there's any follow-up information, I'll put you in connection with Kyle. But if there's any follow-up information that you want or data you want, and we can give it to you, we will. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Thank you all for your perseverance.